Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. I'm Reed. Along with me, as always, it's Mike. Mike, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Reed, I'm doing okay as long as I'm talking about comics,
Talking comics, always good. Mike,
right?
you and I have been spending some time over these last couple of videos, and we'll have a couple after this as well, just talking about modern comic books and what we think would help fix some of the issues that are happening in modern comics. As always, we are not the 100% experts on this. We are just coming at this as two fans who want the industry to get better. And we're mainly just looking at the main issues that me and you see that are causing a little bit of harm to sales or maybe some lack of investment from fans.
Yeah.
Certainly around the big two is mainly what we're focusing on as well. There's a lot of great things happening in the indie space, but we see some issues with the big two that are costing some readers. We covered a little bit earlier. We talked about the pricing point in part one. Part two, we talked a little bit about repetition, too many of the same characters, too many of the same stories. Part three for you and me as long-term fans, I think, is the one that is the most annoying to you and me. And that is the lack of commitment to long-term storytelling or just the loss of overall continuity that takes place in comics. And so, Mike, you've been buying comics, I think, what, since the mid 70s or early 70s for you? Largely continuity for a very long time for when you were buying all kind of made sense.
Yep.
Whereas now it's almost impossible to put together a comprehensive timeline of your character because so many events just seem to be forgotten. So for you, Mike, when you talk about like the lack of long-term storytelling, stuff like that, what stands out to you in terms of kind of that loss of continuity overall?
Well, I mean, that was one of the things, how I became a collector was, coming into the comic book fandom in the 70s and discovering all these adventures that had happened before that led up to the point where I pulled the comic off the rack at the convenience store and took it home. It's like, there's more to read. And how do I find these back issues of the comics and put the pieces together? That little collector gene, that collector
Yeah.
thing that we comic book fans have. All of a sudden, it was activated, turned on to full swing, and you kind of like they call it being a completist. Now you had to run and get the
Completionist, yeah, yeah, for
yeah
sure.
the complete story, and like I gotta get every issue I can because they did kind of all fit together.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, as an older guy coming back in and still love comics, I want my pictures and my stories to go together. And it's just a little bit tough for me to follow some of these storylines because, and I don't know if it's just a modern thing and this is the way it is, and this is the way the new fans get into it. But it seems like it's almost expected that when a new writer takes on a project, they get free reign and they just get to go and break down continuity or write stories that are completely different or kind of crazy and go against the grain of the continuity that was established before. It's kind of irksome, and I don't know if this is just the new trend and this is how things are going to be. But, for long term fans who love these old characters like Thor and Spider Man and Flash and Superman and Batman that have been around for many decades, it's a little bit confusing. And that's why I dropped a lot of the books. I'm like, I don't understand, why Alfred's not around anymore. I don't, I don't
Yeah.
understand why Barry Allen isn't already married to Iris West or isn't married anymore. I don't understand, So, it's you have to take a leap of faith, and I did when they brought Barry back. That my writers are going to put the pieces together eventually, but more and more it seems like no, they're just trying to write new stories. Are we out of stories? And this is the other part of the conversation. Are these characters, now that they're 60 plus years old, comic book timeline, does 10 years equal 1 year? Are they even thinking in those terms, like a natural progression is what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Or are we just like, clean slate, every 12 issues, new creative team comes in, You get to do whatever you want, run with it. If the sales are good, we'll hire you again. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think, when I look at older comics that I really love, what used to happen in stories is everything seemed to have a natural progression, like you said. I think you have a character like Peter Parker. One of the reasons that I think so many people found themselves attached to Spider-Man, and I pointed that out in a couple other videos, but Peter seemed to age. There was a huge delineation of Peter's high school years, Peter's college years, Peter's post college years, Peter getting married, Peter getting more mature, Peter going from the young, annoying teen hero to more of an established hero. And that was what made that character so appealing, is that journey. You kind of felt like, and yes, every 10 years, of comics was probably 1 year in Peter's life, but you really did feel like you were watching him progress. They did a great job with characters like Dick Grayson with that, where he goes from Robin and he's young to then Nightwing and he's leading the Titans and all this stuff. I think what's happened though is with so many characters, they've just stopped that, where it's kind of just like, we don't want to commit long term. And I think that hurts the overall storytelling. And that one of the things is you can take some character risks and really develop those characters, and it will actually give you or your readers something to keep them going forward. I kind of look like recent years, one that I've gotten into, and since the movies and stuff like that really reignited how much I liked the character when I was young, was Iron Man. And I just look at like the last three runs of Iron Man, and these have not been great runs by any mean, but I kind of just look at, Dan Slott was on the character. I think he was on for maybe 2 or 3 years. His run is not real loved, but a lot of the time he spent with it was talking about the relationship with Tony Stark and the Wasp, and them getting together and working together and building this great relationship. And then the next writer takes over, and like one panel in the first issue, yeah, that's done. And that writer spends the next 2 years building up his relationship with like Patsy Walker and Hellcat and kind of getting them together. And Tony's going to propose and all this. And you're like, okay, maybe there's some long term storytelling here. Next writer comes in. It's like it never happened, like never mentioned, never brought up, just largely dropped in the past. And now Tony's married to Emma Frost. And it's like, the writer's leaving. We're probably going to end that in that last issue. And we're talking over maybe, I think Dan Slott's run was 2019 to 2024. You've had these three things that no new writer has wanted to take over. And it's largely because no one seems to have sat down with Tony Stark and said, hey, over the next 10 years, this is what we want to do with Iron Man. This is the plan that we have. And it's just so interesting to see that, because it happens on so many books where you as a reader read, and then like the new writer takes over and it's like, yeah, no, I didn't like that element. I don't want to deal with it. I don't even want to mention it. I'm going to, kind of hand wave it away with one panel. And I think as a reader, it's like, okay, then why am I invested in a story if every 20 issues you're just going to hit the reset button? And I think that's the huge difference between the comics that we loved in the 80s and 90s and well past that, is those felt like natural progressions. Those felt like things built. That felt like they'd let characters get married. They'd let characters have kids. They'd let characters evolve. Whereas now it's like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Like largely, Peter Parker always gets reset every couple years. No matter how much they dangle the Mary Jane bait in front of you, they're going to yank it. He's going to end up single. They're going to be broken apart. And after 3 or 4 years of them not being together, some new writer's going to come in and take 50 issues and build it back up, only for the guy after that to hit the reset button. And I think that just absolutely kills the investment that you have. And again, that's just talking about one angle of the comic books in terms of relationships and stuff like that. I think the biggest one that we've seen where they can't commit to long term storytelling is death. I think the concept of death not mattering in comics is absolutely the worst aspect that we have in modern comics. And that I'd be interested to see what you think on it. Like for me, I hate when they do death stories now, because they mean absolutely nothing to me, because they're so frequent and they don't carry through on them. For you with like deaths in comics, how does that kind of hit you?
Yeah, it doesn't feel real. And of course, it all began with the death of Superman, right?
Yeah, in the
They
90s.
put this event, and then they back in the 90s, and then of course he came back because you can't really kill Superman. So I mean, ever since you cross the Rubicon there,
Yep.
that bridge stays up. You could go back and forth over that bridge as many times as you want. And I have to wonder, like, it's probably just done to juice sales. Are they really going to kill off characters? They did at one point. They let them die for a while. And so it teases the audience. Maybe to into thinking that maybe it's for real. But maybe for the younger audience, I think, well, maybe this really will be the end. But for those of us that have lived through the death of Flash and Superman, and they all came back, I think we know that and it just, it takes the juice out of the story, because well, am I going to invest in this series where apparently Wolverine's going to die at the end, or whoever the
Yeah.
character may be? Am I going to invest in it? And honestly, I'm like, no, because I know it's probably not going to be for real. But not to say that you can't tell a good story with the death of a major character. You can, but it's just kind of disappointing that comics have gone this way, where they have to try so hard, every little thing, and everything has to change constantly, because they're trying to catch lightning in a bottle again. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's one of those things where we only fall for the trick every so often. And I think largely fans have figured out you don't really mean any of this. I look at it, I would say my favorite Marvel character is Wolverine. That is a character I'm been invested in my entire life. When they killed Wolverine, I want to say 2014, 2015. I didn't even buy the comics. I didn't care. And I didn't not buy it because I was so mad they were killing Logan or anything like that. I didn't buy it because I knew when they were promoting it, you're not going to stick to this. This is just lazy. It's a gimmick. This is so you can put a 5.99 foil cover with the death of Wolverine, charge me more. You're not actually going to stick to it. You don't actually care. And it was mainly because you could tell the storytelling going on before that wasn't building to some epic climax. The death of him didn't feel earned. And I knew, like, yeah, you're going to put someone else in the mantle, but you don't actually mean any of it. And lo and behold, 3 years later, oh, Wolverine's back. And it's like, yeah, everybody knew that. And in all honesty, instead of this being this grand moment that as a fan, I'm like, man, he's going to go down. They're going to kill him. You're like, I was more just mildly annoyed. And I was mildly annoyed when they brought him back, too. It's
Let
like,
me ask you.
why did you waste my time?
Let me ask you this: do you think that they, when they planned this out, they really thought that X-23 was going to take the mantle?
No.
And after 3 years, if the sales weren't there, they decided to bring Logan back? Or do you think,
I don't think they ever intended to with Logan, because what they immediately did when they killed Wolverine in the universe, they brought the old man Logan version of the character into the main Marvel continuity and had him running around. So largely inside the Marvel universe, we had the young Wolverine was dead. They immediately brought in a multiverse replacement to come in and be the new Wolverine, and
ah,
he was in the
the
X-Men.
old multiverse
Old, yeah,
switcheroo?
multiverse. And that's the thing
Or
is,
if you're a Spider-Man fan, it was the clone of Spider-Man.
yeah, the clone or the Spider Verse, or and I think that's the thing is when you have so many of these cheap avenues to go down, what ends up happening is a really cool concept like the multiverse gets ruined because you're not using it for a cool concept anymore. You're using it as a cheap gimmick. You're
And
using it
and
as a way to not commit to what you did before.
and there were some monumental multiverse tales told by both the big two that were really cool, impactful, and and stand out as good storytelling. But when it gets used all the time, it can get tiresome.
I think when you use the multiverse to kind of show here's a different spin on the characters and things like that. It can be interesting because it does allow you to go down different avenues. I think that's some of the fun we see in this Ultimate Universe is you
Right.
don't know how it's going to play out. There's Marvel Ultimate Universe they're launching now. You largely don't know what will happen. Whereas you kind of know with 616 and stuff like that, that they're not going to do that. And I think that's the huge thing we're talking about is why is it that when I read an Ultimate Universe story, I go, man, anything could happen here. And when I read
Yeah.
the main Marvel universe, I'm like, you're not going to actually do that. And I think that's the problem that we have is, and that's the thing I give indies so much credit for that. When I read indie books, and God knows I did not want to read indie books originally. I have so much love for the big two characters. That was what I was invested in. I was originally like, I'm not even looking at those on the shelf, that kind of guy. Over time, people would recommend them to me over and over. And what you'd realize is, even for long running books, like something like Spawn that's been around for 300 issues, things matter. things happen. They carry over. The storylines carry over. And so when I'm reading stuff like this Ghost Machine line that's come out, you don't know what's going to happen in the story, and you know, like, hey, they could kill this major character because the writers are willing to take those risks. Marvel used to do that. Marvel used to do it. DC used to do it, and that is gone now. Where you know,
So
like
do
they just won't do it, and you know that, and they've reset it so many times.
so let me put it to you this way. Do you think that it's because the big two are afraid to break their main continuity universes, but they've already broken them? Or do you think, and do you think it's because in an indie book, everything's fresh and new? And you know what I mean? So, like, they don't have 60 years of baggage behind these characters. They have a brand new world. They can do whatever they want.
I think that helps the indie books, but what I will largely say that I do think I do think there's an element of that. But what I will say, they used to, and the big two
Yeah.
they used to. Stan Lee created a lot of the original Spider-Man characters. In the 70s, someone still came in and killed Gwen Stacy. Like
Yeah.
they used to let them take these risks. The guy who killed Superman off wasn't the guy who created him. They used to let them do things. They'd let
Yeah.
Superman get married. They'd let, the Flash get married. They let Wally get married and have kids. Like what's crazy now is all of the characters who are married and have kids and stuff like that are characters from like the 80s and 90s. Largely anymore, they just won't do that with the main characters. Or the big thing is something that's already happened, like, oh, Aquaman's marrying Mira. What a big deal in 2022. Like, yeah, it was probably bigger in like the 80s or the 70s when that happened the first time, right? It's
Yeah.
like with the Flash now. Oh, Barry and Iris are getting engaged. You mean kind of like they got married 46 years ago?
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you guys can't commit to the storytelling thing. And I think that's why so many of these things don't matter anymore, is largely why am I going to get super invested in a run when I know as soon as this run is over, you're going to reboot with a new number one, and you're going to have a new creative team who is largely going to come in and go like, I don't feel like dealing with that. And I think the thing is, it kind of ties into what we talked about earlier with repetitive stories and things like that. I mean, I'm so tired of starting Iron Man runs, and it's like Tony Stark has lost control of Stark whatever this time, the company again. And it's like, how many companies has Tony had hostily taken over from him in the last 20 years? And it's because they can't commit to anything. Like it's just, and I think what would change things so much, what would give them everything they say they want in modern comics, and I use Wolverine as an example. I would never want to see Logan killed. But in all honesty, if in 2014 or 2015 they had actually pulled the trigger and Laura was Wolverine and had been Wolverine for a decade, and if that was implemented across the medium, I'm talking like, hey, video games, Laura's Wolverine, movies, Laura's Wolverine, cartoons, Laura's Wolverine, right? If you want that to happen, that's how it'll happen. But you won't do that. And I think one of the things is, as a longtime character guy, like for me, we talked about this in the last video. I say my favorite character is Batman. It's actually Bruce Wayne. If they would long term kill off Bruce, I'd be done. That would be. It's not that I hate Dick Grayson. It's just no, my story I'm invested in is Bruce Wayne. Great if Dick Grayson moves on. I got tons of back issues I can go collect. There's thousands of Batman comic books I haven't read because I haven't gotten every one of them since 1930 something. And that would actually move the stories forward. And sure, there's a lot of fans who would carry along with it. But the thing is, when you won't commit to it, what happens is all these stories you want to tell me that seem grand and like you want me to buy into the stakes, I don't believe because you haven't committed to them in years. I look at the way Marvel used to do things. When you look at death of Captain Marvel, who is one of my favorite characters of all time in comics. His death is one I hope they never undo. And it's not that I don't like that character is not around anymore. It's that it's poignant. It matters because that happened, and it hasn't been touched, and his sacrifice matters. When Barry died in Crisis, while I'm sure Flash fans were not happy about that, at least that issue you had earlier, the 350, that meant something to you because it was like, man, that was it. That was Barry. Barry went out
Yeah.
a hero. Now it's like, and we killed Barry, and he's back. And we killed Barry, now he's back. And you can go to graphic novels, go to this graphic novel collection anywhere. You basically see on the shelf right next to each other, Death of Wolverine, Return of Wolverine, Death of Daredevil, Return of Daredevil. And it's like, once death no longer means anything in your universe, then what the heck am I going to get invested in? If literally killing a character doesn't change the story, then why does it matter? And I think that's where indies are cleaning up. and doing well right now is indie writers, to what I have to give them a ton of credit on, is despite the fact that they don't have 60 years of character development done by other people, you can tell there's a passion behind what they're doing. And when something happens in their stories, they mean it. It's supposed to matter. It's supposed to happen. There's a gravitas to it. There's something that pulls you in when you see in an indie book the death of a character, or a character breaks and kills someone and changes their moral code, whatever it is. It matters. Whereas, great example with DC. DC had Wally West go crazy and kill like 10 characters in a crisis event comic book that they was what, 9 issues, $5 a copy, all this stuff, all for it to be revealed Wally's the killer. That happened what, 2019, 2020, I think. It's
Yep.
2024. Wally is the Flash again. And it's just like now dropped. Like just yeah. Wally just had that thing where he murdered 10 other superheroes, but
Mm.
now he runs with the Justice League and it's just completely cool.
Well, to
And
be
it's because
fair,
they didn't think that through.
he had a couple of sessions with a psychologist, and he worked through it.
Yeah.
So
Well, he just, yeah. And that's the thing is, again, it's where nothing matters in your universe.
no,
Batman.
I think, and I love the indies, and being a classic comic book guy, I love my old characters, and I cherish those old stories, and I appreciate a good run of them in modern times when they come out. But everything I buy pretty much is indies now. Those are the stories I really like. Like you said, I never know what's going to happen. The creative teams are committed. These publishers are committed. The stakes, are real for them, and the ones I buy, they put out a good product, and I enjoy them, and I enjoy a good story in comic book form. That's why I am the collector I am.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think one thing, yeah, too, is it's the indie guys seem to think through long term of, okay, do I really want to kill this character? Because if I kill this character, this needs to matter. Fans are going to buy this issue. And I think that the thing is, the indie creators know I need to earn my audience with every book that I issue. Every copy that comes out, I need to re up with my fans and get them to buy and to be invested.
Yeah.
And what's happened with the big two is they largely take for granted. They're kind of just like, you like Batman, you're going to buy. We can do whatever we want, and you're going to buy. And
So
the
let
indie
me,
creators don't do that. And that's why it matters so much more. And their continuity matters because they know, hey, in my indie book, if I killed the main character 3 issues ago, and it's like, ah, gotcha, they're actually alive an issue later, the fans are going to be like, then what the heck did I buy?
it begs the question of the state of the modern comic book buyer right now, because the indies have gone to this format largely where they put out 6 or 12 issues of a story.
Mhm.
Sometimes you don't see it again, and other times you do. Like, I keep waiting for this other indie to maybe put out another story,
Yeah.
um, and they haven't in a few years, but maybe they will. But I enjoy them, and you don't know if you're going to get another issue or not. But based on sales and how they do, they might go for 12 issues, or if, like Blade Runner, they do 12 issues, they pause for a while, and then they do 12 more issues. Is that where the modern comic consumer is at? We just want bites at 6 and 12, and that's what the big two are trying to meet that consumer.
There's part of me that says yes, but then I would have to say no in long term in that, like my son does not read American comic books, but he reads manga. And One Piece is the one he's most invested
Oh
in.
my
That's
God, there's like
had
500 volumes of that.
118 something volumes of that.
Yeah.
He doesn't get tired of that because it's one story, everything matters. There's not, oh, unlimited One Piece and ultimate One Piece and uncanny One Piece and just One Piece. No, it's one book by
Yeah.
one writer who cares about his story, who cares about his characters. And the thing is, yes, comics probably have that gap of them carrying 60 years of continuity. But what does make me mad is why was everybody able to largely do it from the 40s to the 80s? Why is it just now that you can no longer do it? Why were most of the folks from the 50s to what 1985 at least with Crisis on Infinite Earths, why were most of them able to keep continuity? And I'm just supposed to buy that over the last 30 years, that's when we can no longer do it. That, to me, it more seems like laziness from the writers of the big two in terms of I don't want to adapt that because I don't know what to do with it. And the whole thing is, if you're going to write Batman, as a writer, one of the things I'd say, and look, I respect anyone who writes, and that I don't have the creativity to do that. I would not be a good storyteller. But even though I'm not a great writer, I can tell you I've read enough stuff to realize what's a good story and what's not, at least. And the one thing that I would say is when I look at people who write comic books, if you want the cachet of being the Batman writer and you want all the fans that come with taking over Batman, because you don't have to do the work to get fans invested. That was done by Bill Finger and Bob Kane and Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams and Chuck
Right.
Dixon and all these other writers who've written the book. When you get that, your job at the very least is to give a cursory glance of what am I taking over and what am I writing so that these fans who are invested at least get something. And I think that's the big difference is they want all the ease of I'm taking over this really popular character, but then they want the freedom of like an indie book of, well, I can just ignore that if I want to. And I look as a Batman fan, there's so many events in the last couple of years that infuriate me as a fan where I'm like, why does continuity not matter? Like, Talia al Ghul in the Batman books. They have Batman where he's just kind of okay with her now. And the thing is, like, Talia's been a murderer for
Yeah.
years. Talia killed her own kid like
Yeah.
20 years or 5 years or 10 years ago in the comics. There's Batman doesn't like anyone who kills. He loses his mind about it. Yet I'm supposed to buy that he's romantically attracted to Talia after she ordered the death of her own son. And it's like, no, if you were gonna take that gamble and you wanted to put that dramatic story moment in there, then that dang well better matter. Same thing with like when Wally West killed 10 people. I'm supposed to buy that Bruce is just running around with Wally now. Like, hey, cool, man. Like that doesn't work. And again, it's because you didn't do the thought process into, hey, when Wally kills 10 people, Wally needs to be a villain now. Or we need to write one hell of an arc that shows why Wally has redeemed himself. They don't do that. And that's where, like, I hate that I've become this guy, but where I do get invested in the indies and stuff like that now is they don't take for granted their readers. DC and Marvel, and I'm not saying all writers, there's still some great writers at the big two who absolutely do the research, get the job done, and do things. But a lot of them kind of look at it and it's like, look, you're going to buy because I threw Spider-Man on the title. So I can ignore the last 50 comics. Doesn't matter. You're still going to buy. And I hate that that's the approach, but it largely is hard to deny at this point. And that's infuriating as a long term fan because if I've invested in the story as a buyer, the very least you can do as the writer is have somewhat of an acknowledgement of that. And they don't seem to want to do that anymore.
I wonder if it's because if it's generational, like this new crop of writers have grown up in this environment where story turnover is just the modus operandi of the medium, and I just wonder, I don't know enough about it to know, but I just it is kind of sad to see the complete meltdown of continuity, and but maybe that's just, I don't know, maybe that's where the
Well,
market's going. I wonder if that it is a new generation of talent and creative talent who understand the medium in this way, that will just turn over continuity, will reboot everything, will give you a new number one, and then 6 months from now, a year from now, whoever takes the helm of the ship gets to do it all over again. um I don't know, I don't want to accept that. I just
yeah,
don't.
I think the thing, because one of the things we want to do is we want to, what are some solutions to this? I think one of the things is if you don't have a writer with a long term plan, then don't even release the book because I think you end up doing more damage. I would say I know they're rebooting Iron Man in like the next couple months. I would hope that Marvel would sit down and go, okay, you're gonna whoever it is gonna be, you're the new writer on Iron Man. Give me a 5 year plan. And if you can't give me a 5-year plan, then you probably shouldn't be the writer on Iron Man. Because here's the thing, I don't need you to, it's not 1,000 pages. You're writing a 20-page per month story filled with action splash pages and stuff like that. This is not like, oh my gosh, an unheard of amount of storytelling. We
It's
have
not the Count of
writers,
Monte Cristo.
yeah, we have writers who write for years and hundreds of pages. You'll look at James Patterson writing Alex Cross and Lee Child writing Jack Reacher and God knows how many other of these book series that have gone on forever. The whole thing is get a writer who sits down and goes, you know what? Hey, I'm writing Peter Parker. Here's my 5-year plan. And this is what I'm going to do. But instead, it's largely, and I'll say this even with runs I've enjoyed. Like I've really liked Jed McKay's Moon Knight the last couple of years, but he wrote 30 issues, and it's like it's time to kill Moon Knight. 3 years, that's it. Like, we had nowhere else to go. Like that's I told my story. He needs to die, and I think that's the thing. Is it's just like I would hope for the big two. I think the solution is let's treat this a little more like the indies treat their books. Let's treat this a little more like manga treats their stuff. Where on these manga runs and stuff like that, like my kid will have these ones that he'll tell me about, and I can't bring myself to be a manga fan, but he'll tell me about like, hey, a main character dies and that character's dead. Like it doesn't seem too often in manga that it's like, oh, he died, but like returned, unless it was like a planned thing from the beginning, not advertised as like this character was dead permanently. And so I think that's where they've got to go to. I just don't buy the excuse that it can't be done. That there are people who honor continuity, and where I will say I don't buy it at all. You and I bring up all the time that Conan is our favorite comic book being published right now. Jim
It's
Zub,
awesome.
Torre, those guys who do that, you know what they do? They honor the canon. They go and they read all of the Conan stuff. What Conan's almost 100 years old at this point. They
This
went
is
through,
true.
they read the stories, they honored the material, they carried over the events, and it's like that's why that book's great. Because if you are a long-term fan, you're like, oh, I see where they're at. I see what they're
Mhm.
implementing. They're honoring what came before. That's what matters. And if you can do that for Conan, you can dang well do it for Batman. You can dang well do it for Spider-Man. You can dang well do it for Superman. And here's the thing. Let's say you get the fresh number one new point that you are at now. Okay, maybe you can't fix what other people have ignored, but you can dang well make it, and in your run, nothing changes. And I think that's the frustrating part is like even within people's own runs now, they can't keep it straight. So I think maybe just a little more intentionality to it, a little more of the attitude of let's go earn our audience with every comic book. I think that's the big thing. And that's ton of love and respect for me to indie creators out there, whether it's guys writing for these smaller publishers or the guys who are publishing these things on Indigo or,
Well, look,
uh,
you got Jeff Johns, who
yeah,
used to work for,
we used to work big too. He has
yeah,
that. No, and that a ton of I just have a ton of respect for those guys, and that it's so easy. I look, and we're running a bit long here, but like I'll bring this up. Dynamite Comics recently launched a Thundercats comic book.
oh
And the
yeah,
thing
yeah,
is, I love that comic book, but I'll say with that, while it's technically an indie publisher, do you know how easy it was to get that comic book to work for me? I have such a love and investment in those
right,
characters that like you had me wanting to buy that from the second it was announced.
yeah.
Almost 90% of the work, not that the writer's not doing a great job on that book, but 90% of the work that he needed to do to get me as a reader was done in the 1980s on that great cartoon.
Just put Thundercats on the
Yeah,
title.
put
Yeah.
Thundercats on it. As long as they reasonably show up and look like the characters, I'm probably going to be at least 90% invested. And so I think what has happened, though, is too many creators take that part and go, I've got that buy in. I don't need to do the work. And I think they need a little more of that indie mindset of where I respect the heck out of the indie creators, man. When you sit down, brand new character, no built in audience, just your storytelling and your creativity, and you can
It's a
find an
proving
audience,
ground, right? It's a
it's
proving
it's
ground.
freaking impressive and all the credit in the world to them. I just wish we'd see a little more of that creativity that we see from those folks going into the big two.
I
That would
think
be my
so
best
too.
advice if they ask me.
I would
But
think so too. If they started doing that, I might, put a few more on my pull list. As of right now, I got more indies than I got big two
no,
on my
and
pull
it's
list.
what we're seeing with this new Ultimate Universe with Marvel that you and I have joined so much. Is
Yeah,
that new Ultimate Universe feels a little bit like that. But
it
that'd
does.
be what we
It
think.
does.
That's I think that's the third problem is just the loss of continuity in canon. Let us know what you guys think below, though. As always, one of the most fun things for me and Mike out of this is reading the comments from you guys, seeing whether you agree with us or whether you disagree with us. It is always fun to see any perspective. Again, we will never pretend we're the 100% experts on these things.
We're just two
Just
guys and a stack of comics.
Two guys with the comics, sitting here giving our opinions and hoping somewhere out in the void someone hears it. But as always, folks, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate everyone who watches and comments. We hope you have a great rest of your day. For any fathers out there, happy Father's Day for what's coming up, and we'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.